I'm so excited to have all of you here, and I'm very honored that Lead Pittsburgh had me moderating, and we have been planning for about a month and a half, so we're excited to be here. There are some people I know that aren't here yet, so as they come in, I'll embarrass them and acknowledge that way. But before we start about all the questions that we're going to talk about regarding mental health, I kind of wanted to go through each of us and kind of say who we are and why we're sitting up here on the panel. So my name is Jordan Corcoran, and I run an organization, come on in. I run an organization called Listen Lucy, and it's a mental health organization, and it started off as an anonymous online outlet where people can share their stories without fear of ridicule and judgment. I started that based off of my own battle with mental illness. I have generalized anxiety disorder and panic disorder. I was diagnosed my freshman year of college, which keeps becoming more and more years away, shockingly. And now I speak to middle school, high school, colleges, and mental health organizations. I share my story and how I started Listen Lucy and the importance of acceptance, both of others and of yourself. And I was connected to Lead Pittsburgh actually through Danielle, which we'll get to Danielle soon. I was connected to Lead Pittsburgh through Danielle and Stand Together, and we wanted to do something that was directed towards parents and people that have loved ones that might be struggling, because we have all been the strugglers, right? And now we kind of have come through it, or have learned to manage it. So next is Amanda. And Amanda, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello. I'm Amanda Filipelli, and I spent over 10 years working in the mental health care system as a mental health specialist, as a therapist, as a program coordinator. I worked mostly with adolescents who were survivors of trauma. And after that, I founded a community organization called Parity Health Services, which was a preventative care and aftercare treatment system that provided wraparound services. And so now I work in publishing, which I know seems kind of disparate, but I had worked in publishing during that time as well when I was running Parity Health Services. And the reason for that was just because I'm a really big advocate for storytelling. I really found during my time working with kids, that storytelling was a really great healing mechanism. And that was what a lot of my business was founded on. And when we founded the press that I work for now, one of the tenets that was really important to us was that we would open up space for diverse voices that felt marginalized to be heard so they could tell their stories. So now, one of the ways I got introduced to this is Jordan and I actually run a storytelling workshop that's meant to help people heal through their words. And I came into this profession in this world after a lot of personal experience with it as a child. My family is an adoptive family to a foster child, and has a long line of struggles with mental health and in the mental health care system. So I'm pretty intimately familiar with it from both sides of the table.
And you're an author.
Sure. And
She's also an author. I have a beautiful book. Okay, Danielle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Danielle Brooks. I work for the Allegheny County Department of Human Services, also behavioral health, a mouthful, as a recovery specialist there. So in that capacity, I promote recovery, resiliency, and wellness within the systems from that peer lived perspective. I'm also the project coordinator of Stand Together, which Jordan mentioned earlier. And we go into middle and high schools and we empower and educate them about mental health and substance use disorders, and then they create projects to attack the stigma associated with them. I also do some work with the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance and Adult Council. Everything I said is so long. And I'm the co-chair there. We create resources. We've done a podcast. There's some handouts out in the lobby, but particularly aimed at transition age youth. I've struggled with mental health conditions as far as I can remember, and unfortunately I wasn't diagnosed until I was 18 and didn't start my recovery journey until I was 21. So there were a lot of gaps where I was struggling for a long period of time, and there weren't services and people weren't talking about it, and I didn't know where to go and what to do. And that's really shaped my experience and shaped my adult life, but also made me who I am in spite of it because of those conditions. So,
Wonderful. And Danielle's awesome. I get to work with Skin together and assist her sometimes, and it is one of my favorite things to do. So fun, and the kids are awesome. Evan, what's up?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see you all here tonight. My name is Evan Markowitz. I'm a junior at Slippery Rock University studying finance. I run a nonprofit called Open Hearts for All, which is dedicated to spreading awareness about mental health and also trying to end the stigma that comes with it. I've suffered from mental health, severe depression, and anxiety for about 6 years now. I started in high school and carried on to college now. I've been able to, it's been a lot of adversity that I've faced through it, but, here I am today. It's not, I'm never, I'm not 100%, but I'm a lot better than I was, and I'm still fighting every day with it, and I'm here today because I want to use what I've been through to help others who's dealing with it, and I've actually had the opportunity to start giving speeches to high schools around PA, to start spreading awareness to teenagers who, I was their age whenever I started dealing with this stuff, and my goal with that is to try and, spread awareness about it and show people that it's, don't be afraid to get help if you really need to. And so that's why I'm here, and I'm very excited.
Awesome. So before we start the questions, now you know how awesome we all are. But before we start the questions, I just want to do a little disclaimer that all of us are going to be sharing our experiences. So what works for us, right, and the experiences we may have might be different than your loved ones or what you're experiencing. So what's awesome about mental health is that there's so many different things that you can use, but the difficult thing is that your recovery and coping techniques really are customized to you. So someone can be sitting next to me with the same exact diagnosis as me, but what works for me might not work for them. So just keep that in mind as we're sharing. We are all very willing to share and make somewhat of a profession out of talking about this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't leave us vulnerable, and that sometimes it is uncomfortable. That being said, the first topic that I want to talk about is stigma. And before I even ask the question, I wanted Amanda, because we were talking about it before we even started here, about us stigmatizing ourselves through this conversation. So you want to elaborate?
So when we met about having this panel, we had an interesting conversation about what it meant to be people with lived mental illness to sit on a panel to help educate others. And so I just think it's important before we start to say that the idea here is that everybody lives on a spectrum of mental health and mental illness, right? It's not, like, I don't want us to sit up here and be qualified as sick people that can help give anybody else answers. I think Jordan puts it perfectly when she says that, our experiences are own, we're willing to share it. So I just think it's important that everybody's open to the idea that this is a shared experience so that we're not kind of stigmatizing ourselves as panelists.
Right. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about with stigma is I want to pull from our own experiences. I think stigma and stigmatizing are words that we're all using so much in the mental health community that sometimes it almost becomes a buzzword, kind of like being bullied or bullying. It's talked about so much that people don't always understand the impact of stigma. So obviously we know what stigma is, which is shame associated with a group of people or negatively stereotyping a group of people without really understanding what they're going through. Come on in, guys. So we kind of want to pull from our own experiences on how stigma stopped us from getting help. I don't know who wants to start. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, for many years, like I said, when I first started suffering from anxiety and depression, it was right at the beginning of high school, and those are the most terrorizing times in a teenager's life. There's so much peer pressure, there's so much, you're trying to find out who you really are. And when I started suffering from this, I felt I was different from everybody else. And I felt that I would be judged for that if I went to get help, even from my own family. And it's a shame because my family is the most loving people I know, and they would accept me for whatever I was going through. I had the most amazing friends, and I still couldn't get it past myself to be able to take that leap and get the help that I could get. So many people don't realize that, especially kids my age and teenagers from 15 to 21, that whether you're in high school or college or even middle school, there's always counselors that are out. And there's just such a bad stigma about it that you're just because you suffer from a mental illness that you're crazy, that that you're a lunatic, and that you present a harm to other people. We see that there are mass shootings and there are mass murder events. It is said that they all suffer from mental health, and then that shows that anyone who has suffering from mental health is automatically a threat to society, and that's why so many people hold back from saying that, from coming out about it, and that was a big reason I held back for so long, and it caused so much more pain and suffering, and it's funny because now that I'm in college, as I was preparing for this event, I looked back on my past experiences, my past struggles, and I look at how many amazing friends, how many amazing family members I have and have had in the past, that if I would have just said something, 5 years ago, how much different it would have been. So it's definitely something that held me back for so long. It's what drives me to help end that stigma today.
Wonderful.
So for me, I think a lot of it started off being external, but began to internalize. So I know, especially working in high schools and middle schools now, the phrase is, well, you don't have it as bad as. But each person's experience is different. In my family, both of my parents and my sibling experienced mental health conditions, and because my sister's was more physical, she had anorexia nervosa, which she continues to have. But they could see that. She was skinny and they could see the struggles. But my mental health struggles were kind of hidden because they couldn't see them. They were the things that were inside my mind. So those things were, oh, you can't snap out of it, or oh, you don't look that way, or oh, you have this face, your grades are fine. Why are you still struggling with all these things? So I didn't know that what I was dealing with, it was okay to get out. It was okay to get help, and that my needs and my experiences were important and to be valued, and that I deserved to be happy and I deserved to get better. And then I talked about that internalized stigma. Like one of the biggest things, and I think we're probably going to talk about this a little bit later, is accepting your own diagnosis, because it's scary. Sometimes people think that, oh, this makes sense. Like, this is a diagnosis, I have something, I can accept it, it's tangible. But at the same time, it's really hard, especially to accept a mental health diagnosis, to think, like, you know what, I'm going to have to take medicine to be okay, or I'm going to have to go to therapy to be okay. And the world says that you need to be perfect, and you don't need to be those things, and you need to just go on with it and get over it and snap out of it. So there's a lot of personal struggles too along the way that I don't know about you guys, but it was really up and down, like, hey, I want to get help, but now I don't want to get help because I don't want to deal with the fact that I'm struggling with these things. But I think that internal stigma sometimes needs to be dealt with too before treatment and recovery can begin.
Oh, I think so, for sure. I think also that it's a continuous journey to continually accept that this is what you're struggling with, right? And I mean, I've been dealing with mine for over a decade, and I still, every once in a while, have to remind myself that it's okay, that this is who I am. I still do like that.
And just to add on to that, she had said that, no one's perfect, no one's going to look perfect, no one's going to act perfect, and you shouldn't try to be that way, and that, don't let that get to you. You start to see so much more now. There's so many celebrities, so many famous athletes that we all look up to that are starting to come out about this, about their own personal struggles, and I think that's fantastic that they're doing that, because it's leading people that absolutely adore them to feel free to actually do that themselves. I'm a big NBA fan, and Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan are two very popular NBA players who, over the past year and a half, have started to come out more and more about that. I think Kevin Love is actually writing a book about that, and it inspires so many more people to be able to feel comfortable to come out of their own skin about this. So I think that's really great.
I think this idea of internalization is really important, like you were saying, because stigma's a weird thing, right? Stigma's learned. I started displaying compulsive behaviors as young as 5, and that scared my parents so much that they were so quick to seek out medication for me. And then that medication did a lot to change my brain chemistry and my behaviors as I grew, and it wasn't necessarily the best thing. And then when I was in high school, there was a lot of hiding about what was going on with me, which that created an internalized stigma of what's wrong with me. And the first time I was hospitalized, we didn't tell anybody in the family, right? Because what would they think? So stigma started to create a real secret around the things that I was struggling with, only to grow into an adult and understand that those things that I was struggling with, a lot of them were genetic. A lot of them were things that other family members were struggling with too, or had struggled with in the past. And we couldn't ever have that conversation that might have healed me because of the stigma that ran through my family. And then, you know, on the flip side, working in mental health care, there's so much stigma inside the system though too. When I started working in residential care, there was this huge thing that they would push, and they would say, you know, if you've struggled with mental illness, nobody needs to know. That it wasn't healthy for you to disclose that, it wasn't good for the kids. And sure, I can see why it's not good for the patients, but it also made us feel like if we weren't mentally perfect, that we didn't have anything to offer. But really, I found the reverse so much more true in that I had a unique perspective to offer those kids. I had an understanding that a lot of people who hadn't been through those things had. And so that stigma was really difficult to battle. I think a lot of people don't do the work that they feel equipped to do because they fear being judged within the healthcare system. So stigma is a really terrible thing. You know, it's just, I wish it almost should end with an ism because it functions the same way.
Yeah. And in my experience, I was actually pretty lucky that when I started actually showing signs and symptoms, my parents took the action that they could and started taking me to my PCP, who actually suggested that I was battling anxiety. So I was actually offered help from pretty early on to where my struggle got pretty serious. But the stigma around admitting that something was quote unquote wrong with me, and being in my senior year of high school and not wanting people to be talking about me in the hallways, it made me so afraid. It made me afraid of what people were going to talk about me, and it also made me afraid of what I was going to think about myself if I had this diagnosis. So instead of offering the help that was being, you know, offered, or instead of receiving the help that was being offered to me, I refused. And then what happened to me was things went from bad to worse when I went away. So I made the decision to not get help because of stigma, really. And there weren't, Kevin Love's weren't out yet, and social media wasn't out there, which there are many pluses to social media in this conversation because this is how we run our businesses. And there weren't conversations like this happening with young people, and there weren't people coming to my school. So I didn't know that this is something that you can continuously fight, and it's a journey, but you can eventually end up a happy and successful adult, and with a very fulfilling life. So I didn't want to sentence myself to being somebody that, and we'll talk about this in the next question, but I didn't want to be defined as mentally ill, right? And that's how the conversation used to be. So that being said, and Danielle, I've heard you explain this so many times, so I would love you to explain person-first language and why it's so important.
Absolutely. So the idea of person-first language comes from the person being first. It's exactly what it sounds like, is that we're all human, we're all people. And whether you have a mental health diagnosis or a physical diagnosis, you are not your diagnoses. You are not defined by one characteristic about you. You are not defined by, if you experience divorce, or if you're a foster child, or if you have cancer. You are not cancer, you have cancer. I am not my mental illness, I have a mental illness. And when we start changing our language, and it's just those little tweaks, it really makes a huge difference. So one of the biggest examples is I have bipolar disorder. So instead of saying she's bipolar, that's she is bipolar disorder, basically. But instead, I have a bipolar disorder. I'm experiencing a bipolar disorder. I'm not my disorder. I'm so many more things other than that. So that's kind of the idea of person-first language, is that before anything else, before our diagnosis, we're a person just like everyone else.
And I think that, especially with stigma, sometimes that people don't mean to insult, right? People don't mean to be saying things that might trigger us. right? But I know for me that person first language and reading people's comments on social media or seeing people being described as mentally ill, it's something you see all the time with mass shootings. It is so damaging because for me, in my experience, when my anxiety comes back and whenever I start struggling again, one of the things that I really struggle with is that my mind starts telling me all you are is your anxiety and that's all anyone can see. And so when I see people being defined as mentally ill, it just reaffirms those lies that my anxiety is telling me. And while, it's an interesting time in the world because so many people are saying that we're the generation that gets offended by everything, but we're also a little more open to things in some ways. And I think that it's important to understand why I'm not going to flip out if someone accidentally defines themselves as mentally ill, because I used to do that. But why it's important to understand the message behind why we don't want to do that, because we don't want to define something as being mentally ill. We have a mental illness. It's like another example is if you have a broken leg, you aren't a broken leg. And that sounds silly, right? But people do describe that all the time. So that being said, I was asked this question when I was speaking at a school in Columbus, and I loved it so much. I made the kids give the other kid a standing ovation for it. He was real embarrassed. But I was asked, what things have been said to you with good intentions but actually were stigmatizing?
That would be a nice question to have beforehand.
I told you I'm not giving all the questions beforehand.
My mom always asks me if I'm cycling, and that really hits me the wrong way. And I know that it has good intentions because sometimes if she thinks that I'm struggling, that asking me that question is like respecting me in some way, like trying to measure or take a temperature of my feelings. But really all it does is tell me that she knows that there's times of the year that she feels like she needs to treat me differently, and that exacerbates the problem. So that's a tough one for me. I think when people try to tiptoe around what they know about you, instead of just, it's almost like when you have a mental illness, people feel like they're in constant reaction mode to you, when it's really unnecessary. Like you said, what if I had a broken leg, you wouldn't constantly be like, oh my God, are you gonna trip? It's like,
right.
it's the same kind of idea.
Like if you didn't know that all of us up here on this panel are affected by mental health conditions, would you treat us differently?
Right.
We're okay with telling you guys, hey, we are going to use our experiences to help others, but is that who I am? No, we're not the token person with mental health or substance use disorder. So I think that's a really great point.
And I think that when we're battling mental health conditions, it's not like we're always triggered, like it's not something that people always need to be concerned about. And it's something, especially in this panel and our stories, we have a pretty good handle on it for most times. I know for me, something that has happened in my life is someone in my life had said to me at one point, like, we're all constantly walking on eggshells around you because we don't want to upset you. And that, of course, was not meant to upset me, but it was a misunderstanding of like that they're causing these issues. And my reaction to it, and as I talk to kids about it as well, is that nothing that you're going to say to me is worse than what I'm saying to myself in my head. So I'm way tougher than you could ever imagine because I battle myself all day long, every day, all year. So to make it seem like you can't be your full self or tell me that what's actually going on in the situation because you're afraid of how I'm going to react is unfair, in my opinion, because I can handle it, right? My mental health condition, my mental illness don't make me weak. And I think the intention was we want to protect you, we don't want to upset you, but the way I heard it was we don't think that you can handle it. And I can handle it, but I'm pretty awesome. I'm just kidding. But anyone else have anything else to add?
This is like more of how people use mental health as a negative side, more than, like walking on eggshells.
Right.
You see this so much in high school mostly, but surprisingly enough, you see it in college. A lot of people would use the phrase "killing yourself" as such a broad statement. They don't realize the impact that it has on it. And I remember in high school so many times where even when I was having like the worst days where I was like just absolutely miserable, and I'd hear, there'd be a group of girls walking past me and be like, oh my God, I just failed this test, I'm going to kill myself, you know what I mean? And it's words like that really have an impact on someone that's seeing that, because someone might actually be struggling with that. When I was struggling with that at the time, it really hurt to hear that, because I was like, really, do you really want to do that? You know what I mean? So that's something that I wish would change too, that people would also realize the volume of their words too, that things they say can also have a super negative impact as well. It can also, because you don't know whoever you're saying that to, you don't know what they're actually going through.
Well, and I think I've had this conversation with my husband actually a few times about the idea of being triggered and what it does to people that are battling these issues, and the words that we're taught through recovery and through therapy. I've learned how to communicate what my triggers are, but everybody in the world is saying, well, that triggered me, and it's because of test or something that might have upset them, but they also say it and it trivializes what the word means. And I'll say to my husband, that triggered me, and he'll roll his eyes and say where did you hear that on Real Housewives or whatever? And I have to explain to him, there might have been a chance that that's where I originally heard it, but I explained to him it's very difficult to communicate my mental health struggle. So these are the words that I've been taught, and they have so much power to them when I can explain what a trigger is, whenever I used to not be able to explain what a trigger is. So when people are using them and it desensitizes them, is that the right word? Yeah, minimizes it. And I think that's a really, really great point on how people are using words that pack a lot of punch for us, for what we're dealing with.
It is a hard thing to filter too. You see it constantly on social media.
Oh, for sure.
Once a day.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to have thick skin about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I think just to speak to the family dynamics though too, between parents and children, it's easy to minimize your children and what they're saying and what they're struggling with. I know in my personal experience, both in my own experience, but also working with children and their parents, a lot of parents try really hard to speak for their kids who are struggling because they think that they're doing them a favor. The intentions aren't bad, but especially when they're in situations with other people and their child is trying to express something, or maybe even getting upset or something, but you always see them stop and explain for them. But that's so disempowering, and it really teaches them that they're not capable of expressing what they need to express. And I see that happen a lot. And I think that it's really important when we're thinking about what the words we're using and the behaviors that we're using, how would you do that differently with a person if you didn't know they had mental illness, even if it's your own child? So I think that's just an important point to put to you in terms of family dynamics.
Yes, okay, so let's go into family dynamics. All of us kind of have different situations, which is really cool. But I want to talk about family dynamics from one side of being maybe the only sibling that has a mental health diagnosis versus living in a household where there are multiple diagnoses. So, and kind of how that impacted your recovery. So who wants to share?
Well, I know most of my family suffer from anxiety. Never really depression. Anxiety is the more common one, you think. So my family always knew when they first, when I finally opened up to them about it, they knew in a sense how to help me with my anxiety, but with depression they had no idea. Because it really is such a fragile subject to talk about. I have a twin sister, and I know she suffers from anxiety, but not depression. And so my parents had to find a way to, okay, my sister Kara has anxiety, but our son Evan has anxiety and depression. How do we deal with both at once? It's really hard for a parent to deal with those things, because you're never really taught when you're younger how to process that, how to deal with that, let alone how to help someone who you love so much deal with that. So when I first told my family about it, they, the first thing they automatically thought was therapy, it was to put me on medication. And I didn't know if we were going to get into that second medication, but those aren't the answers to everything. They're good answers, but they don't solve every problem. And so I think sometimes we're very limited in what we know, what our solutions are to help mental illness. We think that it's literally medication and therapy, and that's it. And that for a while, that's what my family thought was the main way to help me, but that's not. There's a lot of other ways to do that. And I know we'll get into that in a second, but you know, it did take my family a while to adjust to that and how to help that. But in the end, they were still super supportive about it. You know?
I think my experience was kind of very different. So even though everyone in my family was affected by mental health conditions, they were undiagnosed and untreated. So I grew up in a family where everyone was affected by those things, but no one was dealing with them appropriately. So that sort of chaos became my normal. I assumed that no one was happy. I assumed that everyone wanted to hurt themselves. I assumed that everyone had these dark feelings and that I was supposed to live that way forever because I lived in that home where there was, you know, this angst, and I don't like to use the term dysfunction, but it was dysfunctional. We weren't operating. There was always a lot of fighting going on and abuse because parents were, my parents had unresolved issues. And because back then, people don't talk about those things. I mean, we're definitely talking about them a lot more now. But my parents' generation and even before that, like, you don't talk about mental health. You know, you don't talk. It's swept under the rug. And it's great that it's coming out now, but I think especially as a parent, if a parent's struggling, number one, they're probably modeling some negative behaviors to the youth. But also if they're struggling, you can't pour from an empty cup. So they weren't knowledgeable. They didn't know how to deal with what they were dealing with. So they clearly wouldn't have been able to know what to do with myself in those situations. So I think that my dynamic is very different, that my parents weren't supportive because they didn't know how to be. They weren't educated. They weren't aware of it. They didn't know what options were because they never had any idea. And because they were experiencing it and I was experiencing it, that was just how our household ran. But it wasn't until I got older when I saw different families and I was like, something's not right. Like this shouldn't be. I shouldn't want to die. I shouldn't want to hate everything. I shouldn't want to be sad all the time. Like, I'm not understanding where I am. And even though I thought that was my normal, once I got outside of it, it really kind of opened my eyes. Now, you know, I can say now that there are, so 50% of our family is getting help and 50% of it's undiagnosed and still either my sister refuses treatment and my father refuses to accept the diagnoses. So it's still definitely a very interesting dynamic, but I think the more we have these conversations and the more we become educated about it ourselves, that we can have that and model that appropriate self-care, like for our children. So if I ever have children, you know, I know that the chance of them having a mental health diagnosis is very high. But I feel grateful now that I've had those experiences so that if I do have children, I know how to get them help. I know how to have these conversations, and I know that it's really important to talk about these things.
Amazing.
We have such a diverse panel in terms of experiences. I think it's good. So I'm biologically an only child, and I grew up in a family of alcoholics and people with substance abuse problems. And that was pretty normal in the same way that you were talking about how chaos seems normal. That was definitely the situation for me. And like I said earlier, I displayed a lot of symptoms of mental health conditions pretty young. The first time I started drinking with my parents, I was 8. And it only kind of got worse from there. But I will say that my parents, speaking of intentions, were always really well-intentioned. I mean, they loved me, they provided for me, we went on family vacations, like we did all of that normal stuff, but at the same time, there's a lot of really deep-running problems. And when I started to be diagnosed, even really young, my family openly accepted the diagnoses, but they said, they used to always tell me, that's just who we are. You know, that was like their statement. There's almost a pride in my family to be sick. And when I got a lot of healing and quit drinking after years of trying to find my way through recovery, there was a real disconnect between my family. I mean, at one point, my mom even told me that she didn't think we would have a relationship anymore because we didn't have that connection, which is a delusional connection, by the way. It's not a real thing. When I was 12, my best friend at the time was being kind of pushed back and forth between her biological mother and her grandmother. Her mother was a really bad alcoholic and drug addict, and she was put into her grandmother's home, who we found was abusing her. And it was one of those situations where, like, she has it so much worse, right? And my family really tried to do the right thing in fostering her, so we adopted her. But unfortunately, not only was our household ill-equipped to take in this child, but the system really didn't provide any services or teach my family how to adopt a child that came with all of these kind of pre-existing conditions and things that she would ultimately need help with. So she, the chaos in the family really made her worse. So for me, a lot of people were worried that as an only child that I would be deprived of attention when she came along, but for me it was great because I didn't want the attention on me, because I was struggling with a lot of self-harm and other things that now I had something to take the attention away from me, and so that made me sicker in the way that we were doing something good, and I was proud of my family for adopting her, but it also fueled the problems I was having. So she eventually was taken out of the home and I was hospitalized, and so things really unraveled when I was an adolescent. And now as an adult, we're having a lot more open conversations. I mean, I wrote a whole book about it, so my family really couldn't get away from it anymore. And so, but that's been a good thing. I mean, I really learned that words mean very little in those kinds of situations, and try to lead by example, and through that example, we've had a lot of conversations about what needs to happen in our family, and the help that's available, and how different things can be, the hope that there is. And for us, it's really been about, especially my parents, taking responsibility for their part in these things, and not in a way that's bad, that they did anything wrong, that they had bad intentions, but just in an honest, open way, so that we can all heal together. So that's kind of where we are now.
Yeah, well, thank you all for sharing that, because it's not easy to do. In my situation, in my household, out of my siblings, I'm definitely the only one. And I am a middle child. I'm 3 of 4, and my first 2 siblings, I swear, haven't had an anxious day in their lives. Maybe now that they're parents, which I feel like I just smiled like I was happy they were experiencing it. I'm not. But when I was growing up, my sister, like any job she applied to, she got, and everything just worked out for her. She would show up to the airport like 20 minutes before her flight and tell them, like, just get my stuff there, just do it, it's up to you. And my brother Brandon, everything came so easily to him, and they were amazing siblings. And then I came along and kind of felt like I was, I make the joke all the time that I'm like a hurricane, and every room I come into, I kind of destroy when I'm on one. And I kind of felt like I was so out of place. And I felt like I was really not understood, and that I never felt like I was a burden, because I feel like my family I've always been so lucky to feel loved and taken care of and protected, but I never felt like anyone understood me. And what I will say is that someone in my family does battle, one of my parents does battle, and whenever we finally had that conversation, it made me feel so understood, and it really, I think as kids, a lot of times we see our parents as people that are supposed to be perfect, right? And it's really hard for us to see them as human, and I'm learning that more and more when I talk to kids in many different situations, that understanding that our parents are also people that are doing the best they can. But I think for me, it really changed my outlook and made me understand that my parents weren't going to be disappointed in me because of who I am, and because of my diagnosis, but that we had something in common, and that I felt, I know they had to be hard, and they're sitting in the back of the room, so choosing my words wisely right now, no, just kidding, they know. I've read the book too, so they know. But I think for me, it made me feel that I was understood, and I feel like what was really important for me and my family dynamic is that I never felt like anyone ever gave up on me. And I know that had to be super hard for them to constantly be answering these phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was in college and feeling like I couldn't figure my life out. But one of the things that I learned through Stand Together is we do this activity called Cross the Line, which I now have done a couple times with Lucy as well. And how many kids, when we ask them to cross the line, if they've ever felt unwanted or unloved by one of their parents. And I mean, even right now, it can make me cry because I feel like, unfortunately, that does happen a lot as I've learned through Stay Together. And I just feel like in my family dynamic, while I may have felt like I was kind of like in an aquarium and everybody was constantly watching me, I never felt unsupported or unloved or unwanted. So I think that's really, really important if you're in that position to make sure that your loved one doesn't feel like a burden because of something that I really couldn't control. Yeah.
That something you brought up, Jordan, really strikes a chord with me, and it was an important part of my recovery, is that idea of having a vulnerable experience with another person. So, I always twist person first as parents, teachers, they're people first too, and a lot of times you don't realize that. So that's a conversation we have, but that was one of the sparks in my recovery, that not my parents were having honest conversations, but someone outside of my family, that I now call my second mom, was vulnerable with me, and she saw the signs of bipolar disorder in me. She saw those things, and she revealed to me herself and her personal struggles with that. And that was huge to me. That was like the light switch is like, wow, I don't have to be like this. Like, people could be successful revealing and having these disorders, and we're scared to have these conversations. And it's not even, it's all around, it's parents with youth, it's teachers with youth, it's each of us with each other, students and adults to adults. And we don't talk about these things because we're scared, but in reality, us being vulnerable with each other is the only way we're going to create these connections and get better. I always think that secrets can either build walls or build bridges. And these things, like a lot of times in mental health and substance use, we keep them secrets. We sweep them under the rug. We don't talk about them. But there are so many people that are experiencing these same things. And, getting that point across that, wow, you're not alone in whatever you're experiencing. And it's okay to not be okay. And there's people that have experienced this before. And people can and do recover. You don't have to live this way. It can get better. And I think that starts with those vulnerable and open conversations about mental health.
I think so too. I think that empathy is the number one thing we all are constantly trying to promote, and that connecting with each other or feeling sorry for each other, for ourselves, empathy is always the way to go. That being said, I want to be very honest really quick, because I know we all were pretty resistant teenagers, right? So I think what's important about that is because, and I know for sure my parents experienced it, and they don't have a microphone, so I'm not going to let them talk about it, but they were offering help for me, and I was shutting them out. And things were happening to me. I was being bullied before bullying was a thing. And, now my sister always says now, like, if that would have happened now, it would have been on the news. And I wasn't sharing that. I didn't even tell my parents the full story until I was at least like 21 or 22. So all these things were going on. And instead of, accepting the help or the support that I was receiving, I would like lash out. And part of that's my mental illness, but part of that is just being like a brat teenager. And I think that one of the things we wanted to talk about was when you're dealing with a resistant teen or a resistant loved one, when you're trying to offer help, right? What those best practices are for you. So you guys go, because I feel like I already shared mine.
I can tell you as a professional and as a child in that situation what works and what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is negotiation. I think one of the great things my mom always did was when I was, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that for parents, having a kid with a mental illness and them struggling or lashing out can be a really scary thing. And so I feel for you, and I felt for my parents. But one of the things that was always important for me was that my mom did not approach me with that like alarm. Like shouldn't freak out, which I see a lot of parents do, and it's justified, and I get it, but that anxiety projects onto those kids, and it only exacerbates it. My mom just would sit there, and she would just wait it out, and she was quiet, and it was fine, but just having that body next to you, knowing, everybody says, like, just listen, but it's really sometimes the best thing that you can do. I think a lot of times I see a lot of parents and professional healthcare providers try and negotiate with kids and like to de-escalate them, when really those kids, like when somebody's in a crisis, that they need structure, and they need you to be calm enough to provide that structure. And so it's about making sound decisions, like sound, quiet, calm decisions, in a space for somebody who can't necessarily make them for themselves in that moment. And so having a plan, I think, is really important too, so that they can participate in those decisions in some way, even if it's not in the moment, creating a plan ahead of time. But kind of yelling, shaming, blaming, these are obviously bad things, but they're things that we kind of snap and react when we react and we go into, and it's understandable, but that's why having these open conversations with your children or with your loved ones, and the other thing too is not hiding from it, calling it out for what it is. Like my family spent a lot of years hiding from what I was doing, and it was really, really detrimental to my health. And I just have to share that ironically, the first person to ever send me to a counselor was a teacher, and I actually ran into him before we came here at the gas station, which is crazy. So, we had a very close relationship, just as even teacher and student, but he was not scared to say, no, I know you don't want to do this, but this is what you're doing, and sending me to a professional who could help me, whereas a lot of my family was scared to do that. So don't shy away from those problems, don't act like they're not happening.
Actually, I have a lot of friends that actually, who maybe know someone that is struggling through this, ask me a lot of times about what to do, because they know that I suffer from mental health, and they always ask me, what do I do if my sister is going through this, if this person's going through this, and every time I tell them the exact thing, and I start off by saying that there's no really right way to do it. There's no, the wrong way is to scream and shout at them and get up their case about it. But there's never going to be a right way to do it. When you love someone so much, it's going to be so frustrating when you see someone that you just, whether you're a mother or father or a brother or sister, if you see someone you love going through that, and you're trying to reach out to them and see what's going on, and all you want to do, you have that physical instinct to help them, and when they just keep pulling back, it crushes you inside. I've had friends who I've seen go through the same thing, and I try to help them, and I forget my own roles with this, that how I've experienced the same thing, because when you see them go through that, you forget everything. And it's so frustrating when they pull back and they don't tell you what's really going on. And something I had to learn was from my own experiences that, when you're going through this, we don't want people asking you constantly what's going on. You want the reassurance that they're at least thinking about you. I pulled back so many times when my parents asked me what was wrong with me, why I was in such a bad mood, why I was in my room constantly, day and night. The second I got back from school, I locked my door and I wouldn't come out. I'd skip dinner. It was so frustrating because they knew something was going on, but I wouldn't actually admit it to them. But the one thing that actually got me through it all was when I had friends and family who they noticed that something was off me. I'm a very happy person, and when I'm not happy, people do tend to notice. One thing I did hate about always being happy because people would always be on my case about it. But the one thing that I always appreciated were the people who, whether it was my parents or my close friends, who would maybe just say it in person or just send me a text and say, hey, I don't know what's going on with you right now, but I just want to let you know that I'm thinking about you. I love you so much. If there's anything you can do, if there's anything that I can do to help you, please let me know. And that was what really got me through all of this a lot. Because I may have been going through something and I may not have been ready to open up about it, but at least knowing that there were people there for me who could at least, notice that there was something going on, and I knew that I had the option to reach out to someone if I really needed to. And at the end of the day, that's kind of the way you have to do that. Because you want to you know, everyone's scared when they see someone who's so down and depressed. You immediately think, oh my God, what if they're suicidal now? What if they're, you know, what if they're going to do something so horrible? But you can't just assume that, and even if there is the, you know, a sense that that's what's going on, you have to play it so carefully. It is like you're walking on eggshells. You have to be so gentle with it because it is such a fragile topic of discussion to talk about. And so just showing your loved ones that someone that you know is going through this, that you love them and you're thinking about them and that you're there for them, that goes a lot farther than constantly ask them. Because eventually you have to trust that they are going to come to you. And my parents had that trust, and eventually it took a few years, but eventually I did come to them about what I was going through. And I know it was such a huge relief to them, but that patience for them really did pay off.
Yeah, I think in my situation, I get asked that question all the time, especially when I speak at colleges, which I'm sure had someone like me come and spoke to Mercier's College where I went, my roommates would have been, hey, can you help us? But I think for me, what I always tell people is, in those situations, all you can do is be solid and be patient. So I was very lucky with my friends in college that I didn't have good friends in high school whenever in that scenario. When I went to college, I had friends that really became my family when my family couldn't be there, and that they were just so solid. And my husband, who was my boyfriend since high school, which is very weird, but we have been together for a very long time, and I always say he's the person I want to be around if I'm having a panic attack because he's so calm. And he stays so calm. And nothing has ever shook him since he was 17, that he just sits there. And I think the quiet and just knowing that someone's physically there has been so greatly beneficial, and I think we all can kind of agree with that. There are so many things that were said that my brain's like going all over the place, typical. Danielle, signs and symptoms of what we need to be looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So we use these, the campaign to change direction has 5 major ones. So of course we all know there's a whole book, the DSM book that's like this thick. We don't want you to memorize those, and when I teach it whack to help them remember. So there's 5 of them. The W stands for withdrawal or isolation. So we know that during the teenage years, you know, people do tend to like change groups, right? But if they're not replacing activities with other activities, or they're completely isolating and not engaging in any social behaviors, that's one of the first signs, is that withdrawal. The H, hopelessness. So one of the things that can sound like it doesn't matter anyway. You know, I don't even know why I'm here. So those statements are clear red flags that like someone is really struggling with something. You know, again, even looking at like not doing well in school. You know, if I didn't get in that I did leave school, then what does it matter? A is agitation and anger. So a lot of times people think, oh, it's just anger, that's a big thing. Agitation can be any kind. So it can be any kind of extreme emotions, it can be mood swings, it can be any kind of, you know, it's not just a cycle on the washer, right? Like agitation is actually a real thing, that someone's struggling with something and is very consistent. The other 2 are poor self-care and personality change. So as, you know, family and friends and neighbors and those sorts of things, you know these individuals. And you can get this gut feeling that like, you know what, something's not right. You know, this person isn't acting the way they are, or the way they've always acted, or, you know what, someone that, you know, they dressed up for school and wore makeup every day, and now all of a sudden they're wearing sweatpants and coming in late, and their grades are slipping. Like, these are all visible signs and symptoms. And even though mental health and substance use disorders are invisible, there are things that you as people that love individuals can see or can respond to as initial signs of, you know what, maybe something's going on and we need to reach out and get this person some help.
Amazing. And I love WAP. And they play a game with stand together for WAP. And I love it. They get to high five each other, which I love. Okay, so I think going into this is the topic that is a little bit taboo, but I think it's really important to talk about, and that is suicide and self-harm, especially self-harm. I think it's a really, really difficult subject to talk about, but that is something that we need to be talking about. And I want to start with suicide questions to ask and things that I know Evan had reached out to me earlier today, and I don't want to take away, so I want you to share your experience and what you wanted to talk about with suicide.
First I want to start off, this morning, we found out in the afternoon that this morning at Slippery Rock University there was a freshman student who was found deceased on campus from committing suicide. And when I saw that, it's finals week at school and everyone's running around and getting ready to take their tests, and when you get that email, that notification telling you about that, everything, your whole world just stops for a second, everything freezes, and you just take a moment to think about all that, what was happening with him, what could have been done differently. He was a freshman in college, he had his whole life ahead of him. And for me, it hit home because that was the second time in 3 months that a Slippery Rock freshman has committed suicide. And you absolutely hate to see that because you wonder, was there something as a community we could have done differently? You take it personally. You think, was there something that we could have done maybe, And when I saw that today, I thought, wow, this is ironic that I'm going to an event tonight to talk about this type of stuff. And it made me think about my own personal experiences with this. And it made me feel so not only lucky how I've been able to beat this, or to get past that point of wanting to take my life, but it made me more motivated to try and help others and stop people from going through this. The first time I ever had a near attempt on my life, I was 18 years old. It was the night before my first day of classes in my senior year of high school. And it was the worst night of my life, and I'll take it with me until the day I die. And I was completely numb, and I felt like I was, nothing else mattered. I didn't think about my loved ones. I couldn't, there was nothing that could have stopped me at that point. And I'll never forget, I was 2 seconds from the attempt on my life, and I heard this voice in my head, and it was my twin sister who I'm closer with than anyone in this world, and it just said, don't do it, please don't do it. And if I choked up, I apologize. But I remember when I heard that, I stopped, and I thought for a second, and then right after I heard her say that, I heard my parents' voice telling me not to do it, and then I heard my grandparents, I heard my granddad who's here tonight, I heard my close family friends, I heard the people that I love most all telling me not to do it, and that reminded me that maybe I do have a purpose. I'm here for these people. I may not be here for myself right now, but I'm here for my loved ones. And that wasn't the end of it. I had 5 other near attempts on my life after that. And it was such a fight to get to the point where I am now. And there were times where I thought, this is never going to end. This is a roller coaster that's going to keep on going for the rest of my life. But every time I had those attempts, I thought of those same people every time. And every single time it motivated me more and more to get better. And I told myself that if I ever did get better, if I ever do get out of this mess, I'm gonna start my nonprofit. I'm gonna help others with this. I'm gonna give speeches and help anyone else that I can with this. And 3 years later, I was able to start my own nonprofit with some of my best friends, and I was actually able to last April to go back to my high school on the day of their prom and tell my story to all of them. And it was the best day of my life because I thought that whole time, wow, I waited 6 years for this to come. It was like that moment, like I made it. I'm finally here. I'm not completely better, but this is one heck of a start. And, suicide is something that's so hard to talk about for people. And I know we all know someone who probably have either attempted it in their life or maybe actually went through it. And it's times like when we see this today when a student who's so young, 18 years old, who actually took their life. I thought exactly of that night the first time I ever tried to do it. And I ask that you guys all keep him and your family in your prayers because you imagine for that family how they're not going to have their boy home for the holidays. They're never going to be able to give him his Christmas presents. They're never going to be able to watch him graduate college. And you think of all the moments that he could have had that he can't have now because who knows why. And I remember the first time I ever finally decided to open up to my parents that I have had attempts in the past. The hardest thing I ever had to do was look my mother in the eye and tell her that, because that's a woman who had, cradled me in her arms the day I was born, who has been through every single good and bad moment of my life. And when I told her that, the reason why I held back so much from telling them that is because I felt like I failed my parents. You know, they spent all these years making sure that I was happy, that I had a roof under my head, that I went to a good school, that I stayed out of trouble, and I felt like I had such this amazing life, and I felt like me telling them that I had attempts on my life that I didn't want to be here anymore was like telling them that they did a terrible job of being parents. They didn't give me what I wanted in life. And that's so wrong because they've done everything they possibly could to make me the man I am today. My grandparents have done everything they can to make me the man I am today. And you know, that's why so many people I feel like are so scared to open up, at least for me, because you feel like you failed the people who care about you most. You feel like they're not enough for you to stay on this earth. And that's the most crushing thing to face. And that's why that, you know, people just need to realize that your life, you only get one life, and it's worth it. Whatever you may be going through, whatever, you know, whether it's family issues, whether you have a rough school life, or whatever it may be, there's such a brighter road ahead. Because all those times in high school where I thought that I'm going to be stuck like this with the same crappy people that treat me like absolute crap, and you know, the same feelings that I have. I thought I was going to have that forever, and look where I am today. And I look back at that today and I go, wow, like I can't believe that I am here today. And so that was my experience with all this, and I'm just so blessed and to have the support group that I have today to do what I am.
Amazing. I think what is so important is, one, what we can't stress enough, which all of us talk about, well, Evan, I assume you talk about Evan this weekend, but I assume you talk about is that whenever you are fearing that someone in your family, friends, whoever, you're afraid they are suicidal or having suicidal ideations, that asking them about it will make it worse, and that is not the case. It does not increase the chances that someone is going to die by suicide or attempt suicide if you ask them about it. Sometimes that is what they need. So if there is someone in your life that you are worried about, ask them. That might be the one question that nobody's ever asked. I think the other thing that is really important, and I know we're going over on time, but we're all just so cool. So, what is super important is I had a really cool opportunity to speak at the recovery conference, the Allegheny Health Choices Recovery Conference in October, and the keynote speaker, Brooke Feldman, was amazing. And one of the things that she talked about as being someone that has attempted suicide in her lifetime and has made the most amazing recovery is that she was talking about how someone told her that our greatest treasures are in the graveyard. And that being said, what that means is that so many people that decided to take their own lives robbed the world of the treasure that they hold. And I think that especially Evan, and I know the two next to me as well, are amazing testaments that if they had decided to die by suicide, that look at what we've been missing. Brooke was saying that all the people that she's helped, all the connections that she's made, all these amazing opportunities that she's had in spite of and because of what she's gone through, the world would have never known that, and how important it is and how devastating it is to think about the lives we've lost, which unfortunately it seems more and more everybody knows someone that has died by suicide. So I just encourage you all to speak up, to talk out about suicide and not make it a taboo subject, same with self-harm, which Amanda and I have talked about, trying to figure out how to bring that into our writing workshops and making it a conversation that is something that we can actually talk about and people won't fear, because it is scary. We didn't get to everything, but that's okay, that happens. I want to end though on something really wonderful, and I want everyone to say, what keeps you going? A grade schooler at St. Bede's asked me that question, and I thought it was so awesome. What keeps you going? And I want you to name your favorite thing about your life right now. You know I do that with everybody. Isn't that uncomfortable? Okay. Amanda, you're up.
Okay, what keeps me going? I'm going to give you a real corny answer. What keeps me going? What I love about what we do and the work that I do in storytelling is all of, especially, like all the people I get to meet, but especially all the kids I get to meet. Like the kids I work with are phenomenal. And Danielle, I know that you know all about this. I work with so many kids that society labels as ill-fit and for all different reasons. But some of them are the most brilliant people I've ever met. And honestly, the promise of what they have to offer, their creativity and their ideas and just their individuality is what keeps me going. I love being able to be a part of that journey for them. I love helping them use their voice. I love helping them share their story. So that definitely keeps me going. My favorite thing about my life right now?
Yeah.
My favorite thing about my life right now? I have 2 wonderful dogs. That's my answer to everything about what I love about my life. And I'll just tell you about them because that's how much I love them. I have a pit bull mix named Libby, and I have a little puggle named Frank, and he runs the roost. And they're the best, and they're always my favorite thing about my life. Like more than my husband, more than anything. They're my favorite thing about my life.
That's awesome. Danielle?
I think the biggest thing that keeps me going, and I mentioned this earlier, is the sense of purpose. I have no idea why on my last attempt I sat there and stopped myself and I said, I don't want it to be this way anymore. And along the way, my sense of purpose is realizing that my story has a purpose for others. That when we talk about these things, when we bring light to them, when we have these conversations, it's bringing so much hope and encouraging so many people to get the help that they need, that they're not alone. And I think that purpose is twofold. You were mentioning like how just incredibly gratifying it is to see and work with individuals, and I think it's both ways. It's so gratifying for me to work with these youth and to work with adults and to realize that they're getting the help they need and the services that they need. But also just seeing those changes and knowing that if other people are getting help, and the conversations I have with youth after we talk about these, they break my heart, but they also put a smile on my face, knowing that we're breaking down these stigmas and we're challenging things and we're opening the door to these conversations so that people don't have to struggle in silence. So yeah, my purpose. And then what keeps me...
Your favorite thing about your life?
My favorite thing about my life. I think that's actually kind of tied into it is right now keeping the memory of my uncle alive. He was killed this past spring, and my family has gone through a lot, but I think right now cherishing those memories, especially in the holidays, but keeping him close to me and knowing that he is proud of me and to keep me going with that. I think that's something that right now is an absolute terrible thing, but it keeps me going in what I do. So that's really kind of like a big thing in my life, I guess.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Also for me, like I said, and like you said, the sense of purpose. I remember when I gave my speech, it was the first ever speech I gave, and when it was through my high school, afterwards, there was a kid that came up to me. I had never spoken to him before, and he pulled me aside and he said, I just want to let you know that I've been struggling with the same things, and this actually really opened my eyes today. And that made it all so worthwhile, because if I always come to this, if I can change one life with this, help one person, then it'll all be worth it. And so, things I've been able to accomplish with my nonprofit is, that's what keeps me going every day. And
What's your favorite thing about your life?
like the college parties.
Yeah, college parties are awesome.
Just being able to help everyone that I can and get through colleges.
Awesome. And my answer is just for my own personal recovery, that I've never given up on myself. I've been someone that has struggled time and time again, and every time I try something new. And that can be really defeating, and that can be really deflating whenever the coping techniques that that we're using for so long that were working are no longer working with you. You feel like you're back at square one. But what I'm trying to tell myself is that I'm so lucky to be struggling with something that has so many options for me. So right now I'm in art therapy, which could be its own reality television show. It's not, it's chaos, but I'm getting so much out of it and I'm trying something new and I will literally, by all means, by the definition of literally, try anything that's offered to me because I know my worth and I know what I deserve. I also think what I've been able to experience and the opportunity I've had to help people with Listen Lucy is a privilege. And I feel I don't even know what I'd be doing if without Listen Lucy, so I'm thankful for my struggle. My favorite thing about my life is my family, for sure. We just had another member of my family join us on Saturday. Our little nephew that lives in Cleveland, and our growing family has been one of the coolest experiences. And knowing that the work that we're doing is going to create an easier world for them to grow up without some of the issues that we did. I know we went over, sorry Kathleen, but we just have too much to say. We didn't run out of time for the event yet, but does anyone have any questions for us that we didn't answer? The two topics that I wanted to get to that we didn't is experience with providers and medication and coping techniques, but I know for sure if anyone has any questions that we'd be willing to talk about that, either if you want to raise your hand or talk with us after. Yeah.
Since we have some freshmen,
Yes.
why don't we all just migrate out there? And then we're a nice intimate group tonight, so if you do have a question, would you feel okay just going up to that person individually as we socialize and talk in the back?
Yes, we all have name tags on. We have amazing floaters.
Yeah, we have some.
Raise your hands floaters. You have name tags on as well that are willing to share experiences with you. So if you have questions, please let us know. Thank you so much to Lead Pittsburgh for putting this together and for giving us an opportunity and an outlet to share our stories. We hope you guys got a lot out of it. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out now. If you run out of time, email us. We're all readily available. And really excited to talk about it. So thank you so much, everybody.